Good morning, everybody. Got another chapter of Princess and the Goblin that we are reading today. We are so close to the end. We are finishing this book next week, and it'll just be a little bit at the very end. So today we're reading chapter 28. We left off hearing that the whole palace was invaded by goblins, but with the help of Curdy, he really warded off all the goblins. They went back into the mines, but it's possible that they took Irene too, because they've looked everywhere in the castle and they can't find Irene. So let's continue there. Chapter 28, the chapter is called Curdy's Guide. What do you think that could mean? Who or what could guide Curdy? So let's see if your predictions are correct. I'm going to have us go over to our page to follow along, chapter 28. Okay, now, just as the consolation of this resolve dawned upon his mind, let's stop there for a second because we need to think of what resolve that was at the end of chapter 27. I'm going to go back just in my book. It says, with a pang of despair, he, Curdy, saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king, queen, and prince. But he determined to find and rescue the princess. That's his resolve. Find and rescue the princess, as she had found and rescued him before. Or he would meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. So he has this resolve that he's going to find the princess, rescue her, just like she rescued him. Just as it dawned upon his mind, and he was turning away for the cellar to follow the goblins into their hole, something touched his hand. It was the slightest touch, and when he looked, he could see absolutely nothing. But feeling and peering about in the gray of the dawn, his fingers came upon a tight thread. The grandmother's thread, right? That's how Irene found Curdy and saved him. Now, this thread from the grandmother is going to help Curdy to find his way. So he looked again and narrowly, but could still see nothing. It flashed upon him that this must be the princess's thread. He's starting to believe. He already starting to believe after hearing from his mom, and now he really is able to see and or not see, but touch this thread of the grandmother, and he knows that it's that one. Now, without saying a word, for he knew no one would believe him any more than he had believed the princess, he followed the thread with his finger, contrived to give Ludi the slip, meaning to get away from her without her knowing. And he was soon out of the house and on the mountainside, surprised that, if the thread were indeed the grandmother's messenger, it should have led the princess, as he supposed it must, into the mountain, where she would be certain to meet the goblins rushing back, enraged from their defeat. But he hurried on in the hope of overtaking her first. Now, when he arrived, however, at the place where the path turned off for the mine, he found that the thread did not turn with it. He was thinking, it's got to be in the mine. The goblins took her. Wouldn't it lead there? But no, it went straight up the mountain. Up the mountain? Now, remember that Curdy, he's been kind of on the fence about believing the grandmother. Do you think he's going to follow the thread leading up the mountain or go where he thinks Irene truly is, which is in the mines? Let's see. Could it be that the thread was leading him home to his mother's cottage, he thought? Why would Irene be there? Could the princess be there? He bounded up the mountain like one of its own goats, and before the sun was up, the thread had brought him indeed to his mother's door. The thread brought him back home. There, it vanished from his fingers, and he could not find it, search as he might. Now the door was on the latch, and he entered. The princess there? There sat his mother by the fire, and in her arms lay the princess, fast asleep. Hush, Curdy, said his mother. Do not wake her. I'm so glad you're come. I thought the cobs must have got you again. So worried about Curdy. With a heart full of delight, Curdy sat down at a corner of the hearth on a stool opposite his mother's chair and gazed at the princess, who slept as peacefully as if she had been in her own bed. And all at once she opened her eyes and fixed them on him, on Curdie. "Oh, Curdie, you're come," she said quietly. "I thought you would." Curdie rose and stood before her with downcast eyes. He's really sad. Why? He hasn't seen her since that fight. He says, "Irene, I am very sorry I did not believe you." "Oh, never mind, Curdie," answered the princess. "You couldn't, you know. You do believe me now, don't you?" He says, "I can't help it now. I ought to have helped it before." So he definitely believes that the grandmother is real now that he felt the thread. But he says, "I should have still believed in her, even if I didn't see everything at that time." "Why can't you help it now?" she asks. "Well, it's because just as I was going into the mountain to look for you, I got hold of your thread and it brought me here." "Then you've come from my house, have you?" "Yes, I have," he says. "I didn't know you were there." "Well," he says, "I've been there 2 or 3 days, I believe." And Irene says, "I never knew it. Then perhaps you can tell me why my grandmother has brought me here. I can't think why. Something woke me. I didn't know what, but I was frightened, and I felt for the thread, and there it was. I was more frightened still when it brought me out on the mountain, for I thought it was going to take me into it again, and I like the outside of it best." So what faith does Irene have, right? Faith means believing in things that you can't see. And Irene, or understand too, and Irene didn't want to go into those caves, but she trusted her grandmother and she followed that thread no matter what. It says, "I supposed you were in trouble again, and I had to get you out. But it brought me here to Curdie's house instead. And oh, Curdie, your mother has been so kind to me. She's just like my own grandmother." Here, Curdie's mother gave the princess a hug, and the princess turned and gave her a sweet smile and held up her mouth to kiss her. "Then you didn't see the cobs?" asked Curdie. "No, I haven't been into the mountain, I told you, Curdie," Irene says. "But the cobs have been into your house, all over it, and into your bedroom, making such a row." "What did they want there? It was very rude of them." Of course it was rude of them. That's kind of a silly thing. But she hasn't known anything. She's just been in this house the whole time. She doesn't know that the goblins were trying to kidnap her. But Curdie says, "They wanted you to carry you off into the mountain with them for a wife to their Prince Harelip." "Oh, how dreadful," cried the princess, shuddering. "But you needn't be afraid, you know. Your grandmother takes care of you," Curdie says. "Ah, then you do believe in my grandmother, then. I'm so, so glad. She made me think you would someday." All at once, Curdie remembered his dream and was silent, thinking, "But how did you come to be in my house and me not know it?" asked the princess. Then Curdie had to explain everything. Oh, I thought they were going to get into the dream. Okay, remember this dream that Curdie had, that somebody came into his room, probably the grandmother, to heal his leg. That's what we're talking about here. Just a moment. Hi, Arima. I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of filming a video, but did you finish the test? Yeah. Good. Okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Okay, sorry about that. So that's the dream that he's referring to. Then Curdie had to explain everything, how he had watched just for her sake, how he'd been wounded and shut up by the soldiers, how he heard the noises and could not rise, and how the beautiful old lady had come to him, and all that followed. "Poor Curdie, to lie there hurt and ill, and me never to know it?" exclaimed the princess, stroking his rough hand. "I would have come and nursed you if they had told me." "I didn't see that you were lame," said his mother. Lame means not being able to walk, like a bad leg. "Am I, mother?" "Oh, yes, I suppose I ought to be. I declare I've never thought of it since I got up to go down amongst the cobs." So he hasn't thought about his wounded leg shot by an arrow. It was bleeding and it made him knock out. He was unconscious for a bit. It was a bad wound, but he hasn't thought of it. Let me see the wound, said his mother. He pulled down his stocking or his sock, when behold, except for a great scar, his leg was perfectly sound. After just a few days, this huge wound just has a scar over it and no bleeding. Curdie and his mother gazed in each other's eyes, full of wonder, but Irene called out, I thought so, Curdie. I was sure it wasn't a dream. I was sure my grandmother had actually been to see you. Don't you smell the roses? It was my grandmother who healed your leg and sent you to help me. No, Princess Irene, said Curdie. I wasn't good enough to be allowed to help you. I didn't believe you. Your grandmother took care of you without me. She sent you to help my people anyhow. So she's saying to Curdie, even though she could have done all that work on her own, saving Irene, her grandmother still used Curdie to be able to help too. She did good things through Curdie by having him come to the house and save a lot of people from the goblins. She sent you to help my people anyhow. I wish my king papa would come. I do want so to tell him how good you have been. But, said the mother, we're forgetting how frightened your people must be. You must take the princess home at once, Curdie, or at least go and tell them where she is. A good thought. Oh, yes, mother, only I'm dreadfully hungry. Do let me have some breakfast first. They ought to have listened to me, and then they wouldn't have been taken by surprise as they were. Now, that is true, Curdie, but it is not for you to blame them much, you remember. Remember, just like Curdie doubted, these people don't believe what's the true story either. And you can't really blame them, they just don't know. Oh, yes, mother, I do, only I must really have something to eat. You shall, my boy, as fast as I can give it, said his mother, rising and setting the princess on her chair. But before his breakfast was ready, Curdie jumped up so suddenly as to startle both of his companions. Mother, mother, he cried, I was forgetting. You must take the princess home yourself. I must go and wake father. And without a word of explanation, he rushed to the place where his father was sleeping. What could be the reason? Having thoroughly roused him, meaning waking him, with what he told him, they darted out of the cottage. Okay, so they're going to go back home to the castle. Apparently, Irene and Curdie's mom, and Curdie and his father have something else in mind that they need to do. So we'll see what that is in the next chapter, chapter 29, which is a pretty short one, but I will see you later. Hope you're enjoying it. Bye.